doing? Okay. our September 23rd special called board meeting. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Falk if he would lead us in the pledge, please.
I did that last time. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, today we're gathered to discuss the governor's latest plans or suggestions for public school in North Carolina, Plan A. At this time, I'd like to just go over briefly. We're going to, each of you have been given some bullet points and some information to consider in making our decision today. So I would hope that we could have a good discussion about these. These are all very vital points that have been shared with us as far as the logistics of putting all this together. As you well know, I think October the 5th is the date the governor initially set forth that we could actually go to Plan A. However, to transition from B, to A, it's going to take a lot of work. There's a lot of time involved, and when I say a lot, I'm not talking about 6 months for anybody who's going to misconstrue that. I'm just saying they need time to do what they have to do if we're going to transition to Plan A. So that's what this meeting is about. We've got Dr. Harrell, Mr. Lee from Transportation here, because that's going to be a vital part of the transitioning from one plan to the other. With that, we'll get the meeting started. Dr. Merrill, do you have any comments, sir?
Just, I've got a key member of leadership designated to elaborate or answer any specific questions of each of these items. So if you do them in order or whatever, I'll simply point to a different member of leadership, and that's the point person. So,
okay.
Other than that, no comments.
All right, thank you. Is there any board member that would like to have any comments or before we start digging into the information? Okay. I'll follow the sheet. I think that would be the easiest thing to do. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them to any of the leadership team that I guess Dr. Merrill's assigned to whatever bullet point we're going to cover. The first thing we'll have to do, who is this first? Is this Dr. Ishii?
Ken's got it on the survey. Parental.
Okay, Mr. Dirksen, on the survey, I mean, this is, obviously we've had some good luck and some not so good luck with putting surveys out. I think with this survey, we're gonna have to treat it a little differently in that we're gonna have to get responses back in a pretty quick time period. I mean,
absolutely. What we're talking about here is not doing an online survey like what you saw this summer. Okay. We're actually going to work up a script that'll go to teachers that they will call every single child in their class and get a confirmation if they're going to allow their child to continue on in a face-to-face environment if the board chooses to move forward with Plan A for elementary schools. And if they would prefer not to, then they have the option to move into virtual. So basically, we want to hear from the parent. Do they want to continue moving on into face-to-face Plan A? And of course, in that script would explain what that would look like. Or virtual, which would also have details if their child was already in Plan B, not virtual, what does that mean? And then, of course, getting confirmation from them of which option they prefer. And then, do they need transportation? That's going to be a huge piece for Dr. Harrell and the transportation department, is building routes for students who may not have been on a bus prior to that.
okay, and let me point out one thing. The purpose of this meeting today is not necessarily to come away from this meeting with a decision. Obviously, if we plan on transitioning to A, we would need to make some decision today. I just wanted to point out, I've got it in case board action is needed or taken on it. It's on the agenda. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to take board action on it today. So I just want to make that very clear. But the survey, the sooner that we decide and make the decision, it's imperative that the survey be done very quickly. I don't know, so each
Absolutely.
teacher, you're saying each homeroom teacher or whatever, classroom teacher would contact their parents as they
So-
probably
so
are
if
doing
they
now
have-
anyway.
If they have 18 kids in their class, they're contacting those 18 parents.
So that's gonna be by word of mouth only, that's the
They
only
will be
thing.
they will be calling and reaching out, similar to what they did with inductions and making sure scheduling times and giving information about inductions. We're going to ask them to reach out because we want to make sure that no child is missed in this survey process and that every family lets that school know if their child's going to continue in face-to-face and that they have an understanding of what Plan A is going to look like. Is that 4 days a week? Is that 5 days a week? Is this elementary schools or with the split grade configuration of fifth grade being elementary and middle? Will that impact fifth grade at the middle schools? We just need to make sure that they have clear information of what Plan A is going to look like so that way they can let parents know and then get feedback from them.
Which hopefully after we go over each of these components today, they will have a very clear picture of what it's
Absolutely.
going to be. But I just wanted to make one point. It is vitally important that the parents participate in the survey because that is the data that we're gonna have to use to determine virtual learning, face-to-face, whatever we do. I mean, and it's all contingent upon the numbers we get back from these surveys. So, you know, I don't know that we necessarily need to put a time restraint on it. I don't think it needs to be more than 3 days. And I say that because if that gives each teacher an opportunity to contact their parents of the students they have, then that gives us more time at the end of the day to get the transition planning done if that's what we choose to do.
Absolutely, and I think one stark difference between what we saw last summer and what you're gonna see now is our teachers are already in regular communication with their students and families. So that's going to only help the process in communicating with them and getting their input on which direction they would prefer.
But we just need to stress the importance of, hey, you know, once you are asked a question, you know, give it some thought, careful thought, because that's the data we're gonna have to use to do whatever we do.
Absolutely.
Because I think there's been some instances under Plan B where we've had some that had signed up for virtual that decided they wanted to go face-to-face, and some that signed up face-to-face and decided that 2 weeks into it they wanted to be virtual. But this is kind of we really need to know their intentions.
If I may.
Yes, sir.
There's intention and then there's promise. And there will always be swings both ways that we're going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. And you get the calls as well. Well, I signed up and I was told I needed to commit for this period of time, but here's the situation, et cetera, et cetera. So we will pin it down as best we can, but there will be slack that you and we will have to hear and try and resolve. So, but
Yes, Ms. Gordon.
To the leadership team, don't we need to decide, is returning to Plan A going to eliminate Wednesdays off for students and staff development for teachers? Or is Plan A going to be for us 4 days a week? I think we need to know that.
Well, that's one of the
Before-
components later in the discussion today is what the length of the school day and the length of the school hour will be.
Well, the length of the school day is one thing. I'm talking about whether or not you're gonna have Wednesdays with no students and staff development. And I think that needs to be known before you make a parent survey.
So,
Well,
we're waiting for the board, any decisions that you guys make on sort of all of the points on here before we put the language in place for the survey. So as soon as decisions are made, the survey gets written, it rolls out, and then we know answers to questions like that. So what it will look like, what the days will be, what the hours will be, all of that will be
Yeah.
spelled out when they call. I think, let me also add, the teachers will be doing the actual contacting, but from a district level, we would be doing an all-call saying, your teacher will be contacting you in the next 3 days. If you don't hear from them, you need to call the school because you have to register for one or the other.
but as far as the number of days, whether it's 4 or 5, we're gonna discuss that when we get
Yes.
to that component, so.
Yep.
Okay? Yes, Mr. Latham?
So it's my understanding that every student and every parent is gonna have the option now, if they wanna go to Plan A, even if they're in virtual and had been told they were gonna stay in virtual the entire first semester. Are they gonna have the option to switch to Plan A now also?
That is
That's a question, Ms. Ishii, because if we transition to a different plan, we're gonna, you know, that's the other thing we're gonna talk about today is when do we transition if we do, because if we really, truly, it needs to be done at the end of the grading period, or it's gonna create a huge disruption and for everybody involved. So at the end of the grading period, I guess then they, based on the survey results we get,
Yeah, I mean, it's a board decision of how you're gonna treat students that are currently in virtual.
I think that based on the points that you have made here, and I know we are skipping around, but you have to give them an option to stay on virtual or go to face-to-face on Plan A, because there's some changes. They might not be working with the same teacher. Parents might have a concern because they've established a relationship, and if that teacher is gonna move, they might want their children to move, even if it's not that teacher. So we do have to just survey everybody and get a feel for it.
Absolutely.
that's the purpose of the survey.
Yeah.
And they're gonna be given a set survey to ask specific questions.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And the script will be based on every decision that's made by this board.
That sounded like what you were asking, Wade, was, will the survey include these kinds of questions? No. What the survey will include is, here's what returning to school will look like, here's how transportation will work, here's how, distancing, et cetera, based on discussion and decisions today or in the future. But the survey won't be asking families, so what do you want us to do about fifth grade? What do you want us to do about, no. So, and
No.
it sounded like that's where you were going. I just
No,
wanted to be clear. Okay.
I was just saying, like, specifically, once they understand what the guidelines are gonna be set,
Correct.
if they go to A, do you wanna stay in A, or go to A, or do you wanna stay in virtual?
Or go virtual.
Or, some parents might wanna even say, B's working good, I'd just as soon stay in B. So,
That won't,
That wouldn't
We
be an
can't
option.
B is
do
not
all
gonna be an
grade
option.
so B is not gonna be an option, okay?
If we transition to A, B will not be an option.
And
Right.
what we'll do is, we'll lay the groundwork with communication to the district level, prepping parents with information that we're moving in this direction, if that's the way the direction the board decides. And the teachers will be in contact with them, and as Ms. Ishii referenced, that if they haven't heard from their child's teacher over the next 3 days or, whatever period we set, to please contact the school so we can get input from you directly.
I understand that if we transition to A, B won't be an option. What I'm getting at is, if we have a majority of parents that would prefer to stay in B, then that might be something the board would definitely have to look at. I mean, that's what we're doing the survey for.
No, I think the survey is more of, are you going to stay in person or are you going to move to virtual? And my question I had, and y'all actually already answered it, was if you're in virtual right now, would you like to move to A, in person? Even though they signed up committing for a full semester, isn't that the purpose of the survey, a part of the purpose?
Yeah, so if you're a parent who chose for childcare reasons to put my child in virtual, but Plan A is gonna work now for my situation, I'd like to move my child into Plan A, that'll be an option.
Well, I mean, the point I'm getting is I've gotten some emails actually requesting that we stay in Plan B from parents. So that's the only reason I brought that up.
Well, that's a decision we're gonna have to make today, because obviously we can't do both.
Right.
And
No, you can't do A and
since
B.
the governor has allowed A to be an option, then everybody's aware of that, and those who, and I think it really I'm not gonna say accommodates, but to a working parent, I think A is an option that is going to be, regardless if they like B now or not, I can't imagine that they would, because it's created issues for them with childcare and what have you. So, I think Plan A is gonna be basically, I think our survey is gonna want to find, hey, do you want to continue virtual, or do you want to go to Plan A?
And that was one of the governor's points was, we're moving forward because the science says we can, and Plan A benefits families with working parents. Because now they don't have to worry as much about childcare as they were in the past.
Okay, so, but anyway, I don't think we need to be, our survey is not gonna give them an option of staying in B
Okay.
or
That's why.
It's gonna be either, do you
One
wanna
of them.
transition to full face-to-face, or do you wanna be virtual? So, is that correct?
That is, and of course, the other key with the question we want to find out, will their child be riding the school bus?
Right.
Because it really needs to be, I'm not gonna say a brief, but it needs to be precise and to the point, because we're asking teachers yet again to do something else outside of what they normally have to do,
Absolutely.
which they've already got a plate full, so. Mr. Henderson?
Yeah, well, as we're looking at this survey parent intention, one of the things that concerns me is that Plan A does not require social distancing on buses or in classrooms. I have a major issue with that with Plan A. So is there any way that in this survey we could ask the parents if your child is not required to social distance, would that still?
That will
That's
be
part of the-
spelled out, yep.
That'll be
Part of the
description.
explanation,
Okay.
yes.
It is recommended on the buses to remain and be.
Well, it's
It's
recommended, period, but it's not required. Okay. Any other questions about first bullet point, survey? Now we'll move on to the fifth grade discussion. As you well know, we have some middle schools who have fifth grade. We have some K-4s. So who's going to be responsible for that business?
That's
Dr.
me, Mr.
Harrell.
Chairman. Yes, sir. So as the board is aware, we do have some opportunities here when it comes to fifth grade, because remember, we do have several schools because of our configuration and space limitations, such as Grantham Middle School, Brogden Middle School, Greenwood Middle School, Spring Creek Middle School, that have fifth grade.
How many again?
That's at least 4. Did I miss it?
Okay, sorry.
5.
Say you were going really fast, and I'm like, okay.
Grantham Middle, Brogden Middle, Greenwood Middle, Spring Creek Middle,
Yeah,
Mount Olive Middle. Thank you.
okay. Thank you.
So we have a total of 5 that have fifth grade on campus.
On a middle school campus.
Yes, ma'am. So some of the opportunities there obviously rely around busing as well. I know we'll discuss, or that bullet point further down will be length of day, but how to get these children to and from school when for K-5, social distancing potentially is not required, but it still is for 6th, 7th, and 8th up to the high school students on those buses, and trying to figure out how that would potentially operate for those schools.
Well, you cannot deny those fifth graders at a middle school an education, and it will not be equitable to address only the K-5 that are at K-5 schools, or K-5 schools.
K-5.
So we either have to decide whether to stay with B to the end of the semester, or go with A, and you have to include those students that are on a middle school campus, because they cannot be denied the same education.
Well, let me ask you a question, and maybe this is getting ahead of the game. Because all this is contingent on us going to A.
Correct.
And it's also contingent on at what time we transition to A. So would the board be willing to, with a show of hands, identify whether or not you're good with waiting until the end of the grading period? I think that's an important question to ask, because just like Ms. Burden just said, you know, we're in the middle of a grading period. Our grading period ends
October 16th.
It's October the 16th, so it's going to be, and this is my opinion only, but it'll be very, very, just going to be, it's not going to be good. It'll be more distractible. There's going to be a lot more issues to deal with if we, and we'll get into that later as far as grading and different things like that. If we decide to move in the middle of a grading period, such as October the 5th, which I think that's going to be very detrimental to teachers and students. So would the board be willing, with a show of hands, to express yourself as far as do we want to wait until the end of the grading period to look at this? Is that good with everybody? So we need a motion on the floor to,
Go to A, we'll do it after the 16th.
right, so, can-
Do we need to do it as a motion, or you just want to pass it?
Grace, do we need a motion? Okay, if we can get a motion for that second, then we can,
All right, well, then I'll make a motion. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Burton.
You're gonna make the motions, then we'll discuss it, I guess.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we plan to move into Plan A at the end of the first 9 weeks, so it would actually begin October 19th. Is that right? Is that the Monday?
When does the report
20th,
cards
isn't
go
it?
out?
Oh, that's, yeah.
Monday, the 19th is a teacher work day.
So it'd be the
first
Okay,
week
the
of
20th,
the
20th then.
period
So
would
then
be
I
the
amended
20th.
to say,
Report cards generally go out about a week later, but teachers would have to have their grades in by the end of the day on that teacher work day.
Okay.
so, we have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Now, any discussion, Ms.
This
Burton?
is my discussion. If you plan to move in to Plan A at the end of the grading period, which is, if I was in favor of the move, you definitely have to do it at the end of the grading period for me. But going into Plan A at the end of the grading period does not address the concerns that we have. It doesn't change the fact that you have
K4.
you have K-5 schools, and then you have K-4 schools, and you would have to address those 5th graders that are located at middle schools, and you're gonna have an issue with busing. You also, throughout this thing, they talked about teachers might have to be moved back into the building to address the number of students coming in on Plan A, and then you're not gonna have space for your virtual teachers that need to be in the building. The only way that changes is if you go to the end of the semester and everybody comes back in, or at least your middle schools would be coming back in. And that would solve your problems with K-5.
Well, there's no guarantee that that the governor's gonna clear everybody to come back at the end of the semester.
But if he's got those little kids in there, he just will declare it.
well, we know
And
that.
I'm telling you,
I
mean, you know,
I just want to ask a clarifying, Chairman West, you said if the board decides to move to Plan A, it would be after.
End of the first grading.
So the motion, we're not voting now, we're deciding whether or not Plan A is an option after. I'll hold your motion and
Okay.
we'll keep it, but deciding whether or not the board wants to move to Plan A. If it does, it'll be after the first grading period. So this is still discussion, not a motion yet to move to Plan A.
And the reason that I decided to maybe put that on the floor was because, based on what Ms. Burton said to Dr. Harrell about the 5th grade, she had some concern about the middle of the grading period. So that's why I said we need to determine, you know, because October the 5th is the date you can actually go to Plan A, which would be very detrimental, in my opinion, to everybody in Wayne County Public Schools. So that's why I wanted to clear that matter up and get that on the back burner. So if we decide to transition to A, then we will do so at the beginning of the next grading period. So that's what the motion was at the second. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I have some concerns relative to that motion, basically because we have not made any decisions on any of the other things. Some of these things may impact whether we would be even at that point be ready to go.
I think, given the fact that we said if we decide to transition to A, we're gonna do it at, so, you know, I guess your point is we may not decide to transition to A once we go through all this. Is that correct?
That's right.
So, okay, but if we do, then we're going to wait until the beginning of the second grading period. That's what the motion is in the seconds. Is that right,
So we
Grace?
better to restate it then. No, I went ahead and went with, let's open up under A on the 20th. Let's just go ahead and bite the bullet. But I'm willing to do it as a, if we choose Plan A, we do not make a move until. So I can amend that, if Mr. Falk is willing to amend
Second.
with a second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All opposed? So that is 5-2, Mr. Henderson and Ms. Burden being yes. Okay, so back on the fifth grade decision, Dr. Harrell.
So if in our current configuration and times, we are, as educators, we are not people to say we cannot do something, but it will be extremely difficult to provide transportation services to the same school with the same buses, not having social distance for fifth grade, and then having to figure out how to social distance for sixth grade, as well riding the same transportation services to those same schools.
Can also add, just in the middle school buildings, everybody would need to go eyes wide open into, you'd have a group of students not socially distanced in their classrooms, while the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are socially distanced. You'd also have a group of students coming full-time, and 6th, 7th, and 8th graders not coming full-time in the same buildings. And the probably more complicated piece of it is in middle schools, 5th grade teachers rotate, but in elementary schools, 5th grade teachers don't necessarily. They all have one teacher for their major subjects. So you'd have non-socially distanced classrooms of 5th graders, but you'd have teachers rotating through them like a regular middle school in the middle schools, which would look very different than the 5th graders in the elementary schools. And the principal would have to be managing sort of two separate ways of organizing school in the middle school buildings if you include those 5th graders.
When you say rotating, you mean that they might teach a 5th grade class and a 6th grade class, or just
Potentially, you know, there could be one social studies teacher that teaches 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th,
Okay.
and one math teacher. But in the elementary, they tend to be more one teacher teaches multiple subjects.
But also in the fifth grade, if you're at a middle school, the students, the students would normally, Mrs. Sharpless may teach English, and then they would go to another teacher to teach math.
Right.
So normally, the students would move. In this situation, it may be the teachers moving only, but you still have movement.
But also, if you stick with that for a minute, the 5th graders in the middle schools, because the teachers may also be teaching the other grade levels, those 5th grade teachers would have full-time face-to-face teachers and virtual. We wouldn't be able to separate that because it'd be hard to separate that. So
So I
just be
know-
aware of the 5th graders in the middle schoolers, in the middle school buildings.
So I know at Spring Creek and Grantham, we have a separate wing for fifth grade. So that's, they're kind of on their own. And so those teachers, if they are rotating, they're still only rotating on their hallway. How are they located at Mount Olive Middle, Brogdon Middle, Greenwood Middle?
I don't know.
And so do you know for a fact that any of the teachers cross, like Mr. Latham was saying, from 5th, 6th, 7th? But, because I do know there's certification issues, and a lot of folks are gonna be K-6 certified, so you might have that 5th, 6th person, but do we?
Yeah, no, I don't. I
Okay.
don't.
So,
part of our planning.
I have concerns about how this works in a middle school building with one age doing something very different than the other.
It's going to end up being part of the principal's planning process because
For their
ultimately,
scheduling.
if staff assignments and student assignments need to change, they'll be the ones responsible for carrying that out based on whatever does or does not happen today.
Well, when I was principal at Goldsboro High School, they brought the fifth graders to me. Not Goldsboro High School, Goldsboro Middle School, which is now Wayne Middle Academy, Wayne High Middle Academy. Because of the layout of the building, I had one full wing that I could put those fifth graders on. And no one had right to enter that section if they were not a teacher and a fifth grader without permission. However, because of being a large 6th, 7th, and 8th grade school, I was able to only have 5th grade teachers with 5th grade students. But in some cases, depending upon your staff, that fifth grade teacher may be teaching a subject on that sixth grade wing, which probably was right down the hall.
That's what I was asking.
So you do have some movement, and it would be left up to the principal to try to navigate that schedule. If you are fortunate, you would have just fifth grade teachers.
Ideally.
Ideally, yes.
So, suggestions, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Merrill, Dr. Manning, I'm certain that y'all give this some consideration as to what may work best. Would you be willing to share that with us?
So to me, bullet 2 and bullet 5 go hand in hand. And it really is all about transportation in my head. So the bullet 5 is the length of a school day and the number of days per week, okay? So depending on what decision is made about that determines what the buses have to do to react to it, okay? Because as an auxiliary service, the role is for the buses to accommodate whatever academic plan is laid out, okay? If, for example, a plan A is said, well, we're going to go 5 days a week, all day long, regular school, okay? Well, then what that looks like in a middle school that has fifth grade is now I run my buses at that middle school twice. Once for the fifth graders who have now moved to Plan A, and a second time for the 6th, 7th, and 8th who have to stay on Plan B for right now. Okay, so the solution to that is to leave everybody's day alone in terms of the time of day. And realistically, that one plays in with another one that's coming up later with staffing, because unless we can guarantee that a teacher only has to teach one way, virtual or face-to-face, they're still likely to need that time at the end of the day to deal with virtual commitments that might remain even in Plan A, okay? So to me, bullets 2 and 5 really interact with each other around transportation.
They do. You have the same scenario potentially if you lengthen the day in the tier for elementary schools
Right.
and middle their tier together. For example, Brogden Primary and Brogden Middle School. If you lengthen the day in Brogden Primary to have a full day, then we're only going to have about 30 minutes to make a swing between the tier, which we cannot do.
Yeah.
We cannot. We need more than 30 minutes to drop one off and then pick the others up. If you change the length of day, then you could potentially solve the issue at the middle school with 5th and 6th grade, because if the 5th grade went longer and the 6th grade got out earlier, we could run the buses twice and bring them back to pick up the 5th grade, but you cause a domino somewhere else. The other issue would be if you did that right and we run our buses twice, we become very inefficient, and we will have drivers that will gain time and they will go into benefits, which will cost more money, we'll burn more fuel, we'll become more inefficient there. So we have some negatives, I guess, based on how our building configurations are with 5-8.
And you would also have to clean those buses.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we would. That would be
Because
additional work.
when you bring those fifth graders in, you gotta clean it to go back and pick up the sixth graders.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
have to be spaced out.
And
And then you have to do that on the return route home.
And I understand that Mr. Lee's and your biggest concern is the efficiency rating for the transportation. Not the biggest, just that is one of your concerns. However, we're in a situation right now where we may have to give a little bit on efficiency because we have to get these kids to and from school.
Well,
You just spent money by saying that. If we run longer routes, then the state lowers our allocation because our efficiency rating will drop. So you're writing a check here on money we're going to lose. So that's my caution. And I know you've been criticized in the past for going ahead, and so I'm inserting that right now. So.
I mean, I understand the efficiency and the funding for transportation because we've dealt with it. Mr. Lee?
Well, it's my understanding that what's going to happen this year, efficiency will not be a factor because everything is skewed. So what you're really looking at is you will probably spend more money this year. It probably will not affect our efficiency rating in the future because of the virus. So what you're really looking at is how much more money you're going to spend this year, but not so much in the future.
So if the efficiency rate is not, they're going to, I'm not going to say waive it, but it won't affect the next fiscal school year as far as funding.
Right, because
But-
what we're working off of this year is 18 and 19 schedule. So the money's just been rolling over, because a lot of schools aren't right now even using the buses. So you can't compare, because it's based on different LEAs. So there won't be a way to factor it this year,
So,
more than likely.
Mr. Lee, can you share with the board how much money we spend out of local dollars in transportation each year?
Well, last year we spent about 300,000. But we have a budget that's roughly, a state budget that's roughly $5,400,000 with a 89% efficiency rating. That suggests that it costs us about $500,000 locally to run our buses. So, 10 or 11% is what you estimate you will spend locally to make it happen.
Let me ask you another question. Based on last fiscal school year, well, not last year, wasn't be a good comparison because the year prior to us going out on this COVID-19 pandemic, have you looked at any savings that we might have had through fuel or whatever since we have not been running full bus schedules?
Well, we have looked at some scenarios that we think will move us forward and increase our efficiency. One of the biggest things that we feel that drains our funding is the early college program. And basically, it costs us about $400,000 to run those buses independently. And if you really look at what we're losing efficiency-wise, it's about that dollar amount. So if you restructure that, we could actually potentially save local dollars in the future. And we estimate we could save about $300,000.
I guess my question, fiscal school year 18-19, when we had full bus routes, our fuel cost, repair, maintenance costs for buses, I mean, what is it compared to last year or this year at the same period of time?
Well, we only spent roughly $200,000 this past school year. Of course, we stopped school in March running the buses. So we probably save about $300,000 roughly in comparison to previous years. But it fluctuates because of fuel and other driving factors, maintenance, so forth and so on.
So the additional cost of trying to work out this fifth grade thing at middle schools, is that going to exceed what we were saving if we weren't?
You didn't save anything. What was saved last year is gone.
Understand.
Right. It's hard to say right now the path that we're on. We should save money because we have so few students riding the buses, and the buses aren't running on Wednesdays. But you look at it and you kind of, work your way down, but it's hard to say that we will definitely save money. I know right now we haven't been allocated any local dollars as we have been in the past.
So as Mr. Lee was saying, he and I have had discussions about pulling buses off of the road that have 2 to 8 children on it, as well as looking at our drivers to cut costs, because we know that it takes local dollars every year to make the budget work in transportation. So board, that when you start every year, you are over budget on transportation. So with this discussion, if we have to run extra, it is going to cost us more money. And with our budget situation, every department, including transportation, is looking at ways to get us back to where we don't have to put in local dollars that we don't have right now as we're trying to balance the budget.
Okay, so let's go back to the question so we can move forward on something else. What is your suggestion? What are the other options? Because we got to make it work.
I'm going to have to think on that, to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, because this task of transportation and the sheer position we're in with fifth graders at one school that has 6th, 7th, and 8th, and trying to be equitable to that group of children to provide the same opportunity we would at the others is going to be very difficult to figure out with busing, up front, and figure out what to do. Because if you lengthen the day for your elementary students at your other buildings, you're going to have issues between the tiers. If you lengthen it in those schools that have 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, we might have enough time that we might have to run them twice, but we'd have enough time to make the turn. But then you're going to have issues at the schools that are tiered with K-5 and 6, 7, 8, because the times get closer and we'll have 30 minutes.
Which are how many schools? Grantham?
5.
Fine. And
We're
so
tiered, we're tiered on all the middle schools?
We're tiered
Is it
elementary,
Brogdon
middle,
Brogdon Primary and Brogdon Middle?
Brogdon Mills
they're,
together.
they're tiered.
All
Right.
right, Spring Creek Elementary and Spring Creek Middle, are they tiered?
The elementary school runs separate. The
They
middle
run
school is
separate.
tiered with the high school, Spring Creek High
So they're
School.
tiered with the high school?
Right.
Okay. Then Grantham Middle,
Grantham Middle and Grantham Elementary ride together.
They ride together.
okay.
So they're not tiered, they're on the same buses.
All right, so is what about Greenwood Middle?
Greenwood is tiered with,
Meadow
Meadow
Lane?
Lane.
Okay. And then Mount Olive Middle is,
Carver Elementary
they,
School.
they share buses with Carver.
And then you have Dillard and Carver Heights are
no,
tiered.
Carl Heights has the 5th grade now.
Yes, ma'am. Well,
So
it's,
they're doing 3rd, 4th, and 5th, but they're still tiered with Dillon.
right, because we have other
Okay.
elementary
They
schools that
share
are tiered,
buses.
Okay.
that share buses. Not just the ones that have the 5th grade.
There's actually 100 buses involved in K through 5 transportation.
So, Mr. Chair, just as you're considering 5th grade, I just want to throw out the other way to approach it is to do it by buildings and stagger into Plan A with elementary buildings, which would mean 3 of the 5th grades that happen to be located in elementary buildings would, 4 would come back on Plan A. The middle schools would stagger into A when the governor gives the okay to go with other grades, but you'd be looking at it at elementary schools, you'd do this instead of K to 5. You're free to do this for K1, 2. The governor didn't mandate if you go into A, you have to do K to 5. You know, you have other options. So that's just something to be considering while you're.
Okay, well, so that we can move forward, I think Dr. Lewis had indicated that these two things work together, so we need to come up with some solution to the 5th grade. If not, then, we need to move on to something else and we'll put it all on hold, so.
Mr. West, I was gonna ask, should we go ahead and discuss bullet point 5 first then, and get the length of day part knocked out? And then go back and look at the other, instead of staying.
The length of day and also the number of days.
Number of days, yes, sir. I mean, with that,
Before we move to that, I would just like to throw out the issue of whether or not the social distancing aspect of it for the 5th grade versus the middle school when they're in school. Do we have capability of saying that social distancing should occur from K all the way to the 5th grade? Because he did not mandate that it's social require social distancing, but we as a board could mandate that that's what we want to do, couldn't we?
He recommended, but he
So
didn't mandate.
the only way not to would be for very large numbers of students to opt for virtual so that the number left that are coming full-time, there aren't that many, so they can distance.
But even then, it will be very difficult because you can't have a staff member dual assigned, okay? So let's say that I have a class of 4th grade students of 30, and the idea is that I'm gonna split them in half and send half of them across the hall so that we can social distance with 15 in a room. Well, I have to have a second staff member that can go over there and do something with them, at least for supervision purposes, if not for teaching purposes. And if I send those 15 across the hall to a room where a person is trying to teach her virtual class, well, then I've doubled up on that teacher. So I guess to put it bluntly, if the board mandates that we carry out Plan A with social distancing, you've probably mandated something that's not possible.
And that, I think, is why the toolkit says it's recommended but not required, because we don't have enough
Plan A is really not doable if you social distance.
No.
no, it's not.
No.
I don't know that the board is in a position or ready to waive social, I don't know that we need that responsibility or not.
distancing aspect of it.
I'm sorry?
I didn't understand what you were saying.
Well, I mean, if you want to make a motion to waive or to require social distancing, I mean, you can certainly do that.
Well, I would like to make a motion that we do maintain social distancing in all our schools.
Okay.
But how are you going to do it? You can't do it if you go to A.
So then what I'm saying to you is we don't need to go to A.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
It didn't get a second.
I'm sorry?
It didn't get a second.
Okay, you didn't, so
No,
no
I
second.
didn't second it, I asked a question.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Okay, so the motion failed because lack of a second. All right, so. Let's go to bullet 5 and discuss the length of day and the number of days per week. Ms. Ishii, I may need you to help with this because as far as the number of days, if we go to Plan A, and help me because I'm trying to understand this. I'm not gonna say they don't need the Wednesday, but if they go 5 days, what?
So if they're,
We're taking away Wednesday, which is their day to deep clean and what have you, so.
if we're fully in A, and a teacher is teaching, how we would try to schedule it with teachers and staff it would be we would have Plan A teachers only teaching face-to-face if we can do that, and other teachers only teaching virtual. A big piece of the Wednesday remote day in the middle of the week was to give teachers time to do both. So the hybrid teachers are teaching remote students and face-to-face students. If you were only teaching, and we could guarantee, if we could guarantee that they are only teaching face-to-face, they could do it without the Wednesday remote time. However, I believe they would definitely still need the shorter day for two things. One is for cleaning every afternoon, deep cleaning the buildings, but also if some of their students are out on quarantine, that classroom teacher still needs to be serving that student. So they might have 3 kids that they are in fact teaching remotely. They would need the shorter day, the time in the afternoon, to be able to do that, in my opinion.
A shorter day.
Right, so I think theoretically, if, and it's a big if, are able to staff it totally separately, so that out of the gate, the Plan A teacher either has only face-to-face or only remote, that they could give up the Wednesday remote day, but still keep the shorter length of the day to be able
But
to
all of that
manage
is
it.
contingent on the survey we get and the numbers.
All of that is contingent on that, yeah.
But Mrs. Ishii, I agree with you on what you said, but I think that we have left out something. In K-5, or a portion of that grade span, you have teachers teaching a new curriculum that they are learning through staff development, and then they are attempting to develop their lessons as they go. So we have said that Wednesdays are not only for catch-up, but they are also to allow for appropriate staff development to be offered. So you can't offer it if you don't have a day. You can't. And it is unfair to teachers to ask them to teach a curriculum that they do not know and plan lessons and move forward on that curriculum and not give them some time. Those people that are addressing things for remote learning, whether they are developing videos or not, they still got time to go in during the early hours of the day, and they may have staff development in the afternoon before they get out so that they can clean the building. So, my perspective as a principal, I think my teachers need that Wednesday, or they need a day. Now, that might not go on for the entire year, but I do think it needs to go on at this point in time.
Dr. DeMarco, did you have something you want to say?
I don't know if we could answer this, but how many fifth graders are completely virtual right now? You have no
I
idea?
have no idea. I don't think we have it broken out by grade level. I think we have it broken out by school.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're thinking too about where those kids would end up, as Dr. Lewis said, because we've got the budgetary class size allotments, we can't say, well, if several hundred of them are virtual, that means that the class sizes are smaller, because we'd need to combine the students that are face-to-face with one teacher and combine the students that are virtual with another teacher, so that each teacher is teaching a full load, because we're allotted teachers by student numbers. Otherwise, we're having teachers with much smaller class loads and then the state pays for it. So we don't have the funding to pay for that. Another aspect to your question is that I wonder, with the number of parents that I've talked to over the past few weeks, some of them who are interested in moving from virtual to face-to-face because they felt like their children needed the social, emotional, or the virtual learning was not working in the way they wanted it to, and other parents that were very concerned about their children being face-to-face because of episodes of COVID and concerns about that. So I really think that if we have if the face-to-face option becomes A, then for a lot of families, they're going to have to really rethink their decision. So people that had their children in virtual because childcare was really not possible because they only went 2 days a week and they really needed their children to go somewhere 5 days a week, might now choose face-to-face, whereas families that were very comfortable with B because of social distancing might say, you know, I could send my child to school knowing there was social distancing, but now I'm really not comfortable with that risk, so now I want to go virtual. So we feel like sort of the rules have changed if you were to make the decision to go A, so that even if we could give you right now the exact number of students who are currently virtual, I'm not sure how much that's going to inform how many would go virtual under the new plan, because it's a new set of considerations.
That's what, you would think that a certain percentage will want to go face-to-face, but then without the social distancing aspect, some of those folks would say, I want to go back to virtual. And I don't know, it's going to be a wash.
It's almost impossible to know until we literally share your decisions with every family and then say, based on this set of circumstances, do you choose face-to-face with basically a maximum class size and no guarantee of social distancing? And I want to be careful too, because we are always going to recommend social distancing to the maximum possible extent. So we're not talking about putting children back into classrooms and having them huddle up. They're all still going to be required to wear masks. So teachers will still do what they can to encourage children to keep their distance to the extent possible, but understand that right now we've got some classrooms that literally have the maximum number of children spaced 6 feet apart, and if we added 5 more children to that class, then you've taken away the opportunity for those children to be 6 feet apart. So we have to be careful that we're being honest with our parents and letting them know what they can expect if they choose for their children to go into a classroom.
Ms. Burden, I wanted to say one other thing about 5 days versus 4 days, which is that if we go to Plan A for 4 days and Wednesday is the day when students don't come, then all of the face-to-face teachers will still have to teach remote on Wednesdays. They'll still be hybrid teachers. And one of the things we've been hearing from especially the younger teachers is that's the hardest thing for them, that they prefer to be one or the other, but that would by default mean you must teach remote on Wednesdays, because we have to still teach students on Wednesdays whether they're with us or not. So I hear you about the professional development, but professional development's only a portion of what happens on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's only a
Yeah.
portion, I did recognize that, yeah.
So that concerns me. When we get to the discussion of teachers choosing or being assigned to be one or the other, virtual or Plan A face-to-face, if they're also told, but you will still be a hybrid teacher in Plan A, that,
But that'll be a different type of hybrid.
It will be.
Because they won't be half a day face-to-face plus virtual on the same day. It'll be face-to-face,
Everybody will be
face-to-face,
hybrid.
all virtual, and then
Yes.
face-to-face, face-to-face.
it is,
Yeah, so
It
it's a different hybrid, right?
it is.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. West, would
Yes.
it be okay for me to make a motion for, I guess, my preference or what I've heard from people I've spoken to for the schedule it now, so we can
Move on.
move on a little bit?
That's
I
it.
mean, it failed miserably, but,
The floor is open to anyone who wants to make a motion.
all right, I would like to make a proposal based on the fact that we do still have to make the decision on the blended buildings, the busing situation, et cetera, that we keep the current schedule as is, the shortened Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and virtual on Wednesday.
And that's under,
That's if we move to Plan A. Everything's contingent on the if. And if I need to add that to all the
that's
motions.
also
but-
based on the results we get from the survey.
No,
No?
because it would need to be, the parents need to know what we're doing when we do the survey. They have to be aware, this is what's happening.
So you are making a motion that says, if we go to Plan A,
Yes, ma'am.
you would like for the daily schedule to remain the same as it is now under Plan B.
Yes, ma'am.
We go to school 5 days a week.
But Wednesday is virtual, and Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are still shortened. So the time would not change.
Okay.
Until
But she's saying,
So you're suggesting a 4-day face-to-face, 1-day remote
Yes, ma'am.
with the same length of the day is what
Yes,
your
ma'am.
motion is, I think.
and would not that allow for some staff development if they need it
Yeah,
at
'cause-
that time?
yeah.
Okay.
That's what you said, that's the same thing you suggested.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, but it's with a if we go to Plan A.
Of course, if we choose A, we would not change the time of day unless necessary for buses to run, but it would be the same length of day that they're currently operating under.
Okay, well, if that motion, was to pass, how does that impact the bus schedule for those fifth graders at middle school?
I think if that motion would have passed, it would keep the majority of what we have intact, and then we would have to become creative and figure out what to do to manage those 5 schools.
Okay.
I don't know if that specifically answers your question, Ms. Burton, but, you know, we have
So
5 we have to
it
figure
still
out.
leaves you in the same situation, you gotta find a
We
plan.
have to find a way to make that work, yes, ma'am.
But yeah, just
Do you
step
think you have the
one.
flexibility to do it?
Right, if nothing changes, which it will change, right now there's about 200 kids that go to a middle school that would be affected. So whether that goes up or down, you know, that's what we had to look at. So it's right at 200 kids that are riding the bus now.
But those kids that are at a middle school, you are not gonna transport them with those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders.
I think Ms. Burton, excuse to jump in there, probably would come back to our survey and who decides to come and
Okay.
wants to come, right? Because maybe there's a possibility that some just decide not to come and go virtual because they maybe do not want to be face-to-face, which would then limit how many people ride the bus.
And another thing is that basically, the child will go from 2 days to 4 days. They could ride the same bus in theory, perhaps. They'll just be riding the buses 2 more days, and we do have kids that are doing that now.
Mr.
But-
Young, can you restate your motion?
I'll say we got way into discussion before we got to, if there, it might just die, there may not be a second. The motion is, if we move to Plan A, I make a motion that we maintain the current schedule of virtual on Wednesdays, in person Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, without lengthening the day.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand.
I guess I'll give that one. It's a if. Make sure you have the if.
So all opposed? Grace, did you get that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So Dr. Lewis, based on that, where are we in conjunction with what?
Okay, so.
We still have to.
Still on the fifth grade decision.
Exactly, so
Okay.
is that's gonna have to be worked out, Dr. Harrell, once we get numbers?
I think that would help us tremendously to know how many want to come and what the option is.
What you've got, and this, if I'm out of line, correct me. What you've got is the way the governor's decision was phrased has created the problem. He specified K-5. He didn't say elementary schools, okay? I just took a quick peek at some data I have access to. There are over 400 schools statewide that operate on a configuration that has fifth grade kids in this same dilemma that we're debating right now. Okay, there are some 5-8 schools like we have. There are some K-7 schools out there. Okay, they're at some point going to have to decide, do they treat their K-5 kids differently than the 6-7 kids on the same campus. Okay, so I really feel like what's happened is, if the intent was to say elementary schools, well, that wasn't how it worked out because he specified K-5, but that's the situation we're in, so that's what we have to react to. I guess the decision you all have to make is, you know, do you feel a certain way about it being a campus-by-campus decision, like was sort of hinted at earlier? Do we say out loud in Wayne County, we're going to operate our elementary campuses this way and our middle school campuses that way, knowing the situation that Ms. Burton brought up earlier about some fifth graders being treated one way and some of the other? The other situation you get into, if we say all fifth graders, is we may have siblings on the same campus at Brogden Middle School, and one sibling's getting treated one way and one sibling's getting treated another because we can allow the fifth grader to do things we can't allow the eighth grader to do. Either way, you've got conflict, right? Either way, you've got an issue to try to resolve. I'm not sure that there's a right way or a wrong way, and there might be a lot of wrong ways.
As we navigate through this whole thing, nothing is etched in stone, because I mean, once we get numbers and you devise some way to accommodate the fifth grade, you know, whatever issues that it creates, we're gonna have to address.
Right.
Because there's not some magic potion sitting on a shelf somewhere that we can pull off and use. So.
Correct, and I know that I'm jumping ahead. We have another bullet point talking about routes and scheduling. Transportation would simply ask for time, and as much time as we could have, because I will give Mr. Lee and his staff kudos because they worked extra hours and on weekends to make sure that, you know, Route A, Plan B, and C were completed and got to the principals and the schools to get out to the staff. So when we make a potential change that the board so elects to do, the more time we're given to work it out, figure where our problems are and how to overcome those problems, because we are overcomers. We will adapt and do it because we've done it multiple times. That's our nature, but we just need time to be able to do that.
So given what you just said, we've already decided that, hey, if we decide to transition to A, it will not begin until the beginning of the second grading period.
Correct.
So is that going to be sufficient time?
That gives us at least 2 weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks is what we would typically ask for. It's going to be pushing it.
And that's taking into consideration that we get the survey numbers back as quickly as possible.
Correct.
You can't start counting that, Dr. Harrell, until we get the survey back. Because a principal cannot make a list, a class list of all those grades and bring them in until we know how many students are going to return. So whereas right now, he could have 3 weeks. If we don't get that information back to Friday, he doesn't have 3 weeks.
That's what, I mean, that was the
Yeah.
point I made, so.
Yeah, the more time we have.
Well, he was being gentle, I'm just being.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think leadership team anticipated, we would need to survey the families of all the 6th and 7th, and if 8th grades there, in the schools where there's 5th grade, because they may want to elect to not come in socially distanced because they are now at risk because of the 5th grade if we bring 5th grade in. So we have another group of families that might tip us a little bit. I mean, it just occurred to me as I was looking at this, the 5th grade in those schools becomes the riskier population, if you will, because they're not distanced. And if I don't have a 5th grader, but I've got a 7th grader that's going to school, I'm going to say, nope, I'm coming out. So I think we just need to catch and contemplate how we go with 5th grade, that we're probably going to need to be surveying the middle school families in those schools where there's 5th grade. And that could also affect transportation.
And then will that be a possibility, Dr. Mayor, to do the same type of survey with 6th and 7th grade teachers as we do?
I think we'd have to, yeah.
Along the lines of transportation efficiency, have we gotten any inkling from Raleigh that they're willing to basically give us slack on that? You might have mentioned a little bit about that earlier, but I wasn't sure if it was actually something that had been discussed or if we've even brought it up to the people up in Raleigh.
I'll let Mr. Lee address that one.
I mean, that would alleviate some of our issues with finance, so on and so forth, and cost.
As I said earlier, we're working off the budget from 18 and 19. So there will be no additional money, regardless of whether you make a change or not.
I understand, but if it affects the next budget.
It won't, no.
Okay.
What it is we're going to continue to work off in the 18-19 budget until things stabilize, because there's no basics to change it.
Okay.
Since some schools aren't going to school, some schools are going to school part-time, because what it is they compare LEAs against each other. That's how they drive the efficiency. So if I do better and you do better, then the bar is risen. So right now, there's no way to change that. So it's my understanding we will keep the 18-19 efficiency rating and the 18-19 budget until we have a complete year of regular school.
Okay.
Then we go back into the efficiency challenge.
So they're not going to really look at this fiscal year then?
Right. The phrase is the phrase is hold harmless.
Yeah. Okay.
Is what they're using. That's what they're saying now.
Right.
We might want to confirm that.
But at the same time, if we've been using local funds to support us, then doing this the way we are the way that it seems like we might have to do it, if we address bringing K-5 back now, we could end up needing more funds from our local funds, and that impacts our budget.
Correct. And as I said earlier, we have been looking at ways, because of COVID and our number of students that are on virtual versus who are riding on the bus, to look at taking buses off the road to save local dollars, Ms. Burton, as we go through the grant funds.
Okay. As I say, let's move on to the next bullet point. Student and teacher reassignment and redo master schedules.
That's me, yeah. So basically, once the survey information is back, so we know student numbers, and once the 5th grade decision is determined, so we know the who, we need to look at teachers and who's assigned to do what. As I said, we'd really strongly be working toward Plan A, face-to-face teachers, not also having virtual students. So we'd be trying to make that split. In doing that, there would probably be movement where some students are going to have different teachers, which is again why waiting until after the grading period becomes important. We may have to do some involuntary transfers because a school might need another face-to-face teacher that they don't have available, or another virtual teacher that might have to serve students from multiple schools in order to accommodate. We can't say because we don't know what the numbers are. It might also be necessary, and this is the next bullet, depending on numbers and because of the class size requirements, to do some multi-age combined classes. So if I've always been a first grade teacher, they may need me to be a first and second grade face-to-face teacher, which, Ms. Burden, to your point, training and learning curriculum, I may have to learn a curriculum I'm not wholly familiar with. That's just a factor based on the number of staff we have available to do these two different things. But we don't know, we can't give a guarantee of what that's going to look like till we know the number of students. So one of the things we have to tell them in the survey, tell everybody, virtual or face-to-face, is that it is a possibility that you will have a different teacher than you currently have. And then once the teacher assignments are done, principals will very much have to redo their master schedules because you're going to have different people doing different things in different places. So that's just work, again, that's going to need those weeks once we get the survey results and make these determinations. They can't do the teacher assignments and the master schedules over until they know that information. But that's the kind of work that'll have to be going on quickly in school buildings once they know that. But all families and teachers need to be aware there will likely be some shifting around of who is teaching which students and possibly what they're teaching.
And what is the K-3 class size?
The district average in K-3 is to be 18 or lower, and no individual class can be above 21, and that does apply to virtual classes.
It applies to the virtual classes as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions on that bullet? If not, we'll move to the next decision. I think kind of about.
Takes us to the next page.
So the only thing I'd like to say about multi-age, if possible, is that multi-age right now is offered only at Meadow Lane. It has been a school's choice. Most of the time when parents want to transfer, and they want to transfer to Meadow Lane, it is because of the multi-age class. And we have tried to find out or survey to see why we can't get those classes going at other schools. And basically, it is a matter of teachers having been trained to teach that type of curriculum. And so I'm just saying that, now I know that if I just say what I feel, I know that I probably don't have anybody in here that's in agreement with me. But I'm telling you that what we are trying to do here is not going to be done successfully in 3 weeks. We are just moving smoothly, it seems, in terms of teacher education and student education now in Plan B. But to try to move this, and I agree with you, it shouldn't even be touched unless it's at the end of the grading period. But I'm going to be honest with you, the end of the grading period is not long enough. You really need to go into this looking at starting at the end of the semester when you have told your virtual students that they have to remain there until the end of the semester. And now we have to change that, and then we've got teachers under stress now, and we've already announced that we might have to move teachers with saying that we're not looking for volunteers. If we can find them, we would accept them, I guess. But we have to move. We might have to move teachers to another school, or we might have to have teachers address a multi-age program for which they are not trained for. That allows us to get past this maneuvering of some students being socially distanced and some not being socially distanced. Because no one has mentioned yet, we've talked about the students, but nobody has mentioned the teachers that really have concerns. They have concerns with 10 students in their classrooms. And if they go to 13 and they're not able to do socially distances, then we have to look at that school and see how we can address that concern. I'm just telling you that, to me, it's the end of the semester. You make the move at the end of the semester. Whatever parents are doing now, and I do understand their concern, but whatever they're doing now, it seems to be working for this period of time. And there we go.
Well,
And that's at the bottom of this second page, talking about staff member risks.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, it is, and everything we're talking about, we can't really answer because we don't know the numbers right now. We know there's gonna be some movement both ways. We don't know if it's gonna balance out, overcrowd one and under the other, and if that means we're gonna pull teachers back and forth, it changes, it may change what they are doing right now. I mean, the governor said you may do it. He didn't say you had to do it. Or you work out a different plan if it's later on. But anything that's done should be done at the end of a grading period. Not in the middle, not 2 weeks in. It should be done at the end of a grading period. And I think the best time for us is really at the end of the semester. So I'll shut up now.
Dr. DeMarco.
I understand where you're coming from, but the world is going on, okay? You know, we've got private schools that have been in now for months, and their kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth grade kids and fifth grade kids are moving forward. Georgia, South Carolina, Florida. My concern is, where are our North Carolina kids gonna be 6, 8 months from now when the rest of the world has moved on? You know, they've got these kids, now they've been in school for 6, 8 months, and then we just phase our kids in. They're gonna be so far behind. I don't think they'll ever catch up. Not this year.
Well, I don't think what we are doing to them right now is gonna cause them to catch up. I really don't. And every school is not working. You name the schools that are working, but you don't name the schools that right here in Goldsboro that closed because of a cluster. They weren't socially distanced, they weren't wearing masks, and they closed. And it was K-6. I mean, it was K-6. It wasn't their pre-K, it was K-6. So, you know, I'm not saying hold students back, but I'm telling you, under the things that are going on right now, how much are we helping them as we keep changing? So now, do we change when we have to bring in the middle school? Do we have to go through another overhaul?
So you know what the state's direction is, and you're not gonna know about middle school or high school.
Yeah, right now we don't. But by the time if we move at the end of the grading period, okay? And like I said, if we go to A and we can't wait to the end of the semester, I would have to say the end of the grading period. But just suppose we get them in the end of the grading period, we move them in to plan A, and then 3 weeks later we come up with 6th grade. 6th through 8th grade. Then we gotta make another plan. Or we gotta move people. We gotta deal with those students that are on virtual, and if they wanna come back in.
Well, you know, the dynamics of this changes so many times, it's gonna continue to change. So, anybody else?
Well, Mr. Chair, I would just make sure that we all are aware that I just went back this morning, as a matter of fact, just to look at the COVID numbers in Wayne County, particularly the ones that have affected our schools. And right now, we're beginning to see the brunt of that Labor Day weekend escapades all around the state. But it's interesting for me to note that since we started on September the 8th with this hybrid plan that we had, our cases is almost double from what it was before. So that is something that is very concerning.
Okay, next, Dr. Harrell. You've discussed thoroughly, I think you probably already covered your.
Yes, sir. With some things to add just for bus routes, and yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things we do need the board to give us directive on when it comes to busing, not only as we ask about the time, is whether we're going to social distance or not on the buses. Again, that is not required under the governor's new order, but it would greatly affect how we operate, right? So if we do not social distance and we can put 72 elementary students on a bus, then that would reduce our transportation time as well as how buses are going. If we say that we have more kids coming back, again, we don't have the data yet. We need to see the data who wants to come back to school. But if we social distance on a bus, you know, remember the guidelines from DPI, transportation is 1 child per seat or a family per seat if they're siblings. So depending on our buses, you're looking at 22 to 24 students on a bus. So if we do have a large number that would like to come back, there is a possibility that we would have to pull buses from high schools or other areas to be able to accommodate those children to come. So we do need the board to help us and make a decision as to how we're going to operate either social distancing or not. And then also, one of the other things that we're concerned about as well as our driver safety and the potential that if we do not social distance, will we have some drivers that say, I just don't feel comfortable driving at this time as well. So
I think that's a possibility with all staff, because you may have principals, APs, cafeteria workers,
right,
you know, that don't feel comfortable going back into a classroom environment where you're not social distancing. I mean, that applies to every employee that works for us. So, which could potentially increase the cost to the district, so, which we can't afford. Okay, any questions for Dr. Harrell?
I think he left one for us to answer whether or not we're going to, I think they need the direction as to whether or not we're going to allow for social distancing on the buses or not. That's a large part of their plan. So I think we need to give them direction.
Well, we haven't decided yet, I don't guess, that whether we're going to require social distancing in a classroom, because those two things go hand in hand. We can't not require it on a bus and require it in a classroom or vice versa. So, you know, if we're going to require it on a bus, then we're going to have to require it in a classroom, because we can't get, or not require it in a bus and get 70 kids there, and then all of a sudden we can't social distance in a classroom. So those two things have got to be decided jointly, in my opinion.
What do you want to make? You want to make a decision on that now?
That's entirely up to the board. I don't. Dr. DeMarco?
It's recommended, so but not required. Well, to me, that says, well, that's a parent's decision whether they want to put their child on a bus or if they want to put them in a school. I mean, that's the way I feel with my child. If I'm not comfortable with them, they're not going on the bus. If I am, they're fine.
Ultimately, you're responsible.
Well, you're speaking for your child, but your child comes into contact with several other children as well.
Like I said, if it's recommended, it's recommended. Parents need to make their own mind up whether or not the children are going on it or not. I don't think we should have to say.
Well, I think the Senate.
Well, we have to give our drivers some direction. I mean, that's what we're making the decision for, because we have to look at how it's going to impact everything that's going on. Because it's going to be more students on the bus or less students on the bus.
Dr. Merrill, have you had an opportunity to see what other districts are doing since the governor?
Not yet. There are a lot of Zoom and conference calls going on right now. There's one right now with superintendents in North Carolina. Our region is doing something later this week, but it's too soon to tell. And about all anybody's talking about is you going back to A or not. Not many people have gotten to the nitty gritty other than, aren't these issues you're trying to figure out? And they're going, yeah. I guess what you could do for us on transportation would be to affirm for us that you don't expect us to maintain social distancing. Because to me, A and required social distancing don't go together. There's no physical room on a bus or in a classroom, to do both. So I guess we just need to be clear that the reason the language says recommended is, I think the governor and his folks recognize that they can't require it because it's physically impossible.
And
There could be small schools, or based on the number of virtual families, you might have a classroom here or there, but as a system, I think it becomes very difficult to be able to do that.
And I know that Wake County, I think, is having a work session today to discuss this very thing. I don't have many other LEAs across the state. You know, it is really soon after the go, but I guess the way I looked at it, or maybe the way the boards looked at it, the sooner we can make a decision, if we do, that it's gonna give our people more time, and time is what we hear that everybody needs if they're gonna transition to a different plan, so.
I don't want to put Dr. Manning on the spot, but I know our Strong Schools documents do recommend social distancing in our classrooms and on our buses. I know the governor has a different point, but the documents we have been following currently at this time, we've been following the Strong Schools documents for everything that we have been doing.
Strong Schools requires social distancing in Plan B. That's in the classroom and on the bus. For Plan A, social distancing is recommended, and the language always says that you social distance if possible. So they still tell you to do your floor markings 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart in the cafeteria, 6 feet apart in all the areas that students would wait. So all of the visual cues telling students and staff about what social distancing looks like are there. And of course the encouragement. And they also discourage you, the language that they use for Plan A is discouraging you to have groupings of students. The way I visualize that is the cooperative pods that teachers used to do, where you'd put maybe 4 kids in 4 desks or at tables facing each other and have cooperative groups. So I imagine that under Plan A, we would encourage our teachers, for example, to have all the students facing in the same direction. Similar, thinking about cafeterias and spacing for that. I've spoken with some principals, and there are some elementary schools that already, when everybody went to school, their cafeterias stayed full from 10:30 in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, with all the seats being filled. But the principals would have to be creative and say, well, this group is going to eat in the classroom, and this group is going to eat, in the cafeteria, et cetera. Having kids, when their masks are off, being in places that they're at least all facing in the same direction. So the Plan A still requires all of the morning screenings, and that kind of gets into the next bullet. That's my responsibility. It still requires the attestation. It still requires all the health questions. It still requires the daily temperature checks. And it still requires daily mask wearing. So there are still a lot of safety protocols in place. It recognizes, though, that social distancing, which is defined as 6 feet apart, is not possible. So this next particular bullet about screening procedures is just a reminder that schools will need some time to think about how long those screening procedures might take. You guys might remember that on the first day of school for our elementary schools, the first day of A, and then again on the first day of B, I think it was September 8th and September 10th or 11th, the car rider lines at the beginning were very long because people didn't know what was expected of them, and some of the temperature screening and things took a long time. The principals have reported to me that they have really worked out the kinks in that under Plan B, and they've gotten their car rider lines fairly efficient, down to 15, 20 minutes or so that they're able to screen the kids, take temperatures, and get them into buildings. They do have some concerns that if we have many of our families who choose Plan A that happen to be in car rider lines, those lines will lengthen again, because now we've got maybe a third of the kids coming on A day and a third coming on B day, and then probably another third that are virtual. So I can't tell you what those numbers are going to be because, again, I don't know how many families are going to choose to bring their children back and how many would choose to opt out of the face-to-face and go virtual. But for schools that have large numbers of children that choose the face-to-face, then principals are going to need to really think carefully about those morning screening protocols and how they can be sure that they have enough people doing the screening, that they're able to move the lines fairly quickly, and that the students are fairly quickly escorted then into classrooms. We used to have things at school like morning holding areas where kids that were unloaded early either went in the auditorium or maybe the cafeteria or maybe the gym. And we've eliminated all of that under Plan B because that was large groups of children in holding areas. Perhaps under Plan A, they might would revert to having some areas where larger numbers of students were as they went through the screening protocols. We've not had those discussions with elementary principals at all. So I'm just pointing out that we, even though we'd switch from B to A, we still have to ask every child those questions. And we have a quicker way to do that. We gave parents the bus attestation form and said, if you fill that out and hold up the form, that lets the line go faster so that the person unloading the cars doesn't have to ask those 3 questions to every single car or every single family. That's helped tremendously, but we still have to take the temperature of everybody and we still have to visually see that, and if they don't have that, we have to ask those questions. So thinking about the logistics of that unloading is another concern.
Dr. Harrell, do we have, if we were to transition to Plan A, do we have any equipment such as temperature devices that could be distributed, any more that could be distributed to the schools to speed up the process? Because that's going to slow the process in the morning down tremendously. We're talking about double kids.
We have a few extra hand thermometers on hand, and I've still been communicating with Aaron Stryker because we only received half of the thermometers that the state said we were going to get. I've still been trying to get the other half. So we purchased some ourselves with CARES money to make sure our schools had enough of the handheld devices that they could use to check students when they come through.
So you're saying the state tells we were going to get X number?
The state said we were going to get 71 or 72 when it first came out, and then we only had a handful to show up, and then when I inquired about it, the people at the shipping department of the state ended up telling me that the state changed the numbers we were going to receive and didn't really tell anyone. So they didn't ship as many as we thought we were going to receive. So then we did a second request, and which we have to do through our Office of Emergency Management to request for us. And Mr. Stryker has been awesome. He requested those. We requested 72, and we received 1 box of those, which maybe had 20 or something in it. And so in the meantime, we went ahead and purchased our own with CARES money to be independent of having to depend upon the state. So the state still owes us, according to what their first remarks were, about 40-some handheld thermometers that we have not received yet.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Manning? Dr. Harrell, food service.
Yes, mine simply just, as Dr. Manning was saying, just to note, just to be advisable that child nutrition, of course, as we make any potential changes to going from B to A and more students are being brought onto campus, needs at least a week, of course, to place food orders based on the number of students that are going to be on campus. So that's just really a note as a reminder, again, about time, so child nutrition can adapt and have food on hand to be able to serve our children.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Harrell? Dr. Lewis?
So for transfer of grades before the first 9 weeks, that really is about what happens if a student has to be moved out of one teacher's class and into another teacher's class. We really won't know how widespread of a problem that is until after all the phone calls are made and we are having to, redistribute staff within the school building or perhaps between schools. But when a student is taken out of one class and moved into another, his or her grades in the teacher's grade book do not automatically travel with them, okay? There's a fine reason for that, which under normal circumstances is great. These are not normal circumstances. if students are to be moved, it is always best to move them at a natural stopping point, whether that's the end of the first grading period, the end of the semester, what have you. Otherwise, it becomes more work on the receiving teacher to have to determine what to do with the grades that should be coming from the sending teacher, okay? It will be extra work regardless. It'll be less extra work if whatever transition happens at a natural stopping point.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just curious as to the board's feelings, because I don't think that we should even consider changing to a Plan A as a minimum before the end of the first grade. And I'd just like to see if the board, just in a general position, feels the same way, because I think it's going to be a logistical nightmare for our teachers if we try to do it before the end of the first grade as a minimum.
Mr. Latham, are you referring to October the 16th?
Yes.
We've already had that vote.
That's what I mean, and I just want to make sure, because I don't think we have to worry too much about this thing, because I think the board's already in agreement that we need to do that.
Okay, let's get to these last couple of bullet points, and then I guess we can have those discussions. Any questions for Dr. Lewis? Dr. Mason?
Yes, sir. Staff member risk, just an awareness, as you all are aware, Dr. Merrill continues to send you an updates of teachers that are going into quarantine, or teachers who are requesting telework due to them being at risk. And so you are receiving those numbers and receiving those updates. We do continue to work with staff that are having concerns, providing them with employee assistance to support things that they may be going through because some of them may not feel comfortable as they have come back into the classroom, and then ongoing concerns as well at home, anxiety and stress level. To answer your questions or support this that talks about staff member risk, when we do have those options for those that can telework or those that we may have to cover with substitutes, we only have right now 196 total substitutes, and out of our total number of teachers, we have 1,205 of those, and a total of 196 total subs that have agreed to come back to work. So we are concerned about that, with the number of subs that may be able to cover in the event that we have teachers out with ongoing risks.
And it only stands to reason that the impact is going to be greater if we were to transition to A.
Yes, sir.
As far as, right now, we don't have the numbers because we're socially distancing in classrooms. So when we transition, or if we were to transition to A, in the classrooms and buses, we're not going to be socially distanced. There's no way to do it and go in Plan A format. So there's a good, I guess my question would go back to Ms. Ishii, just given that scenario alone, where now in a classroom, we're socially distanced, but under Plan A, we're not going to be socially distanced. So there may be a very good chance that we may quarantine whole classrooms at the time if there's a positive test. Is that right?
So that's a possibility. Sort of connected with what Dr. Mason was talking about. It's also a possibility that, and we don't know because we haven't surveyed them, but we have teachers who will absolutely, for health reasons, not be able to work in classrooms that aren't socially distanced. Or administrators that will feel like they can't go into a classroom with 30 kids or 25 kids to do a teacher observation because people aren't socially distanced in that space. I don't know what teachers and administrators will say to us if we say, we're going to Plan A, you shall teach this class that's not distanced, or you're going to be principal of a building and there will not be distancing. That's a big unknown for us for how our staff will react.
I mean, and that's all staff, maintenance, operation, whoever.
Everybody in those buildings, we just don't
They don't feel comfortable going in a
know.
building where they're not socially distanced, you
We
know.
can't give you an answer on that.
But, you know.
But yes, if
The
one,
unknown of the numbers is the big catch-all, because I would dare say, and it's just my opinion only, any virtual teachers we have who are teaching virtually now, I really don't see, and this is just my theory, you may think differently, but I don't see any of those all of a sudden saying, hey, well, I'm gonna come back down and teach face-to-face. So I think our numbers are gonna grow significantly in virtual teaching requests opposed to, but it's all contingent on the numbers.
yeah, and, I only have anecdotal evidence of teachers and administrators that have kind of reached out over the last weeks and months with their feelings about this to say that it's enough that it's a concern that people might say, I can't do that. Your original question about the result of a student who tests positive in a non-distanced classroom and what that means, I think Dr. Manning is the expert on that, so she can explain the difference.
So that leads us to the last bullet, which is about contact tracing implications. First of all, I really want to compliment everybody in Wayne County Public Schools, because since August 17th, or even before that, the teacher work days, when everybody was working, when we did all the induction meetings and brought families in, and then when teachers taught virtually the first 3 weeks, and now we've had children in the buildings from September the 8th moving forward, almost finishing up our 3rd week of that. The teachers and the students and all the staff members have done a phenomenal job. They have worn their masks as we've asked them to do. All across the county, teachers tell me that they are very, very pleasantly, I don't want to use the word surprised, because we have high expectations for kids, but it has been very gratifying at how well our parents, our students, all of our employees have followed the very strict rules under Plan B. And I was one of the people that was very concerned about whether or not Plan B was even possible, and they have, in terms of the logistics, they've done a great job. So that's led to the smattering of COVID cases that have happened so far. And those cases that have happened so far almost always have been where someone was exposed somewhere in their daily lives, ended up having a positive COVID test and notifying us, and within the last few days they've been on our campus. So we have very strictly followed all of our protocols. Our nurses have been amazing. They're experts at interviewing and contact tracing, and in almost every case we have found that people have followed the social distancing guidelines, which means it has been an isolated case. Meaning that even though someone maybe worked on the campus, let's say on Thursday, and then on Monday had a positive COVID test, when we go back and contact trace, we find that no one else was exposed. And that's been borne out because even when people have said, oh wait, I was near you, I'm afraid, and they've gone and had a COVID test, which obviously we encourage them if that's what they want to do, it's borne out that the social distancing has worked. So far, what we've done has, I feel very confident that has kept people safe, and the contact tracing has led to our finding that very few people have been within 6 feet for 15 minutes of these people. So if we move into Plan A, then we realize that we're going to have to relearn new procedures. So the new procedures are going to have us thinking about, now that we don't have social distancing, who's been within 6 feet for 15 minutes and what might that quarantine look like. So I'm extremely pleased that up to this point, You notice Wayne County Public Schools has not had to as much as close a classroom, much less a wing or a school, because our folks have done a good job following these procedures. So moving forward into Plan A, then we need to be ready to think about what contact tracing would look like under Plan A. So if there's a classroom, say, of 18 second graders, and those 18 second graders are sitting, say, 3 feet apart in normal rows, and one of those second graders ends up being in a family that someone had COVID, and now they test the child, and the child comes back COVID positive. Now we're in a situation that we've got maybe a ring of students around that student that now we are going to notify. And we've, that sometimes that happens. If it has happened in every single instance so far, if we have found that someone has been within 6 feet of someone for 15 minutes, we have notified those people personally, quarantined those people, and have prevented having any clusters in the school. So we will continue to do that because that's helping NCDHSS protocol. You look at who was within 6 feet for 15 minutes. You inform those people are quarantined for 14 days. And then should they end up having symptoms, of course, they're making informed responses about their own health. So our only point here is that it's easier to do when you social distance, because if people are following our guidelines, then the one person who gets sick, in America, we want it to be when someone gets COVID, they transmit it to no one else. And when you social distance, then you have a very high probability that you transmit it to no one else. And DHSS always identifies household members as close contacts, because when you live in a home with someone, you're going to be in close contact. We'd like for that not to happen in our schools. So we're just asking you to think ahead about, if we move into A, what that might imply, and we may end up in a situation that we have more students who have been exposed than we have currently when someone tests positive.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Manning?
I do have one quick question, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it. You're in the middle of a second grade classroom and you test positive. Everybody around you, are they automatically quarantined for 14 days regardless of negative testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And the explanation for that is that sometimes it has an incubation period of up to 5 to 7 days, and then many people who get sick are then asymptomatic. So if you've been exposed to a known case.
And that's what I thought, but you added the extra caveat. So if symptoms don't show up for 10 days and I get tested at 10 days and I'm negative, can I come back in? Because I saw on a piece of paper somewhere, and I can't remember, I think it was at the pediatrician's office, if a child is positive, they had to stay out for 10 days.
Yes.
But a child that's been exposed has to stay out for 14.
Yeah, and that's a very strange sounding thing, isn't it?
Yes.
And here's the rationale for that. DHSS says that if I'm exposed to Mr. Dirksen and I find out he's positive, the 14 days builds in the window that it takes me to get sick, and the 10 days it takes me to get better. So you have to add those two together, whereas if I'm already sick, I only need the 10 days. And I say get sick, many people don't get sick. Many kids are asymptomatic, so they build in that window of time, because even if you're asymptomatic, you might spread it to someone else. And we tend to backtrace thinking too about when someone would have been contagious, because people are often contagious before they're symptomatic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Dr. Manning.
Just, so the next iteration, I think, of a non-distance classroom is that the contact tracing would have us close the classroom for 14 days.
Right.
And I just want to be sure you knew that would be the next sort of iteration of a positive exposure of a student in a classroom. So just didn't want surprises on it. I think it makes sense because there's a lot of movement in proximity, but that's what could arrive next.
And that's very important for parents to be aware of as well. So,
Can I just add, those kids in that classroom may be on 10 different buses. So your decision about whether or not to distance on buses, they may be exposed to kids who are not even in their classrooms that are on buses with them. So you have to consider that too.
Okay, any more questions for Dr. Manning on that? Ms. Ishii, I think you touched on this basically, but you want to touch on the workspace?
Yeah,
virtual
just
teachers?
depending on where we end up with number of face-to-face classrooms in buildings, how many teachers need to be virtual, how many need to be face-to-face. We will have to plan and figure out where everybody is going to be working, because we may need, as David said, one classroom to split a group of kids and the staff members with them in the room across the hall, but that may be the room of a teacher who's a virtual teacher. So we can't guarantee that every teacher can teach out of their actual classroom, whether they're virtual or face-to-face. They'd be moving around. We might have to find some central location for virtual teachers to do their teaching. We have to wait and see what the numbers look like, but we can't guarantee you're going to be in your building in your same room for teachers.
Okay. Anything else any of the leadership team would like to add? Dr. Merrill? Well, as I said when the meeting started, we put board action on the agenda in case we took board action today. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to. And I'll just share with you some of the concerns I have. Obviously, I think we all want every kid back in the classroom ASAP as soon as we can get them, because they're just not getting what they need. But would we be better served to maybe wait until the end of the first semester? Because I don't know, and none of us in this room know, that this is an ever-changing situation that we're in. So is the governor now going to come out next week or the week after? I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we make a decision based on the end of the grading period instead of the end of the semester, and then we transition our kids to A, and then all of a sudden we have many outbreaks of COVID where we quarantine classrooms of kids and different things. And I guess I'd like to say it's not going to happen, but I mean, unless you live in a cave, it's happening around us every day. So do we want to roll the dice and keep putting out different plans or making different decisions, knowing that something else is going to come from Raleigh that's going to govern what we do or the direction that we take? Because these kids don't need all this inconsistency. I mean, Plan B, I guess there's some that would argue that it's not working. I think it's been a smooth transition. Look, I'm all for going back in A. However, I have to look at the overall picture. I mean, obviously, if we waited until the end of the semester, that would certainly give plenty of time to plan for teachers, parents, students, or whatever, and it wouldn't be, anything we do is going to be disruptive, but it wouldn't be as disruptive. But then I look at that on the reverse side, I say, okay, we've let our students go through a half of the school year, and then all of a sudden we're going to change them up and start completely different at the beginning of the next semester. So I mean, there is no right answer. So I don't know if any of you have any input. I certainly would welcome you to say it and speak.
Can I just add, we were going to have to resurvey families for second semester about who wants to be virtual and who wants to be face-to-face. So come along November, early December, we have to redo that survey regardless of A, B, or virtual anyway.
If we stay in Plan B,
If we stay in B, we told them their commitment was for the first semester and they'd be resurveyed. So, just keep that in mind.
Okay. Any comments?
Well, I feel like we're at a point where we really can't make a decision until we know what the staff and the students are gonna do. The staff and the students can't make a decision until we make a decision. It's, I don't really know the actual answer, whether it's the first 9 weeks or the semester, or, I don't think there's a right answer. It's, as bad as I want kids back in school, I also want to be able to go to the basketball game or football game. I mean, I guess I want it all. I don't know the answer if it's the semester, the 9 weeks.
I think it would help us make up our minds, seeing what the family survey says.
Is it possible to have a survey to say, if we go back in Plan A, here's the consequences, what would you do with your child? So at least we have some ideas of what's gonna happen. I mean,
We can word the survey questions however we choose to.
The only issue you're going to have is the time. Because you're now 7 business days away from October 5th. You're only a couple weeks away from October 20th. So if you're trying to find out what parents want to do, the time situation that they're referencing along these tables is still going to be in play, trying to plan.
well, I'm
And then you're
saying,
going to be in a situation of having to
is out of
decide,
question.
are we going to break semester, or I mean, break the next 9 weeks up to make the transition?
Well, personally, I know that the 5th is out of the question.
5th is out of the
And I don't think that we can be ready by the end of the grading period. So, I mean, I'd be more than willing to put a motion on the floor that we can seek information, and use at the end of the grading, at the end of the semester. Because that's when we're gonna have to do it anyway with the virtual students. So whatever plan we are on, A or B, the virtual students can move from virtual to B at the end of the semester if they so choose. Am I correct?
Yes.
Unless you go A.
Unless we go
Remember,
A.
we're gonna have A or B, not both.
Well, I know that, but I'm talking about if we stay in Plan B right now.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
people can shift.
Now, are you asking move at the end of the quarter or end of the semester? Because they weren't gonna move until the end of the semester.
I'm asking that we, if we are going to go into Plan A, that we choose to do it at the end of the semester.
Are you making that a motion, Ms. Burton?
I will, I move that if we go into Plan A, that we make the transition at the end of the semester.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. Grace, would it be, because even if, with the motion and the second that's on the floor, that still gives us time in case we get, and not in case we get, I'm sure we're gonna get, I feel confident we're gonna get different guidelines from the state as to how we do it. So that gives us an opportunity not to go from B to A at the end of the grading period and then be told by the state that we're, okay, all of a sudden we got so many kids and so many positive tests. I mean, just assuming that it's gonna happen, and I don't see why it's gonna be any different than it has been.
So if this motion passes, you would be saying that Plan A won't happen until the end of the semester, is how I understand that motion.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said.
If the motion, as Ms. Burden put it forward, which is to go into Plan A, if the board decides to go to Plan A, it will be at the end of the semester. That's what will happen.
Do you want me to rephrase that as no transition will occur until the end of the semester?
But that just gives us an opportunity to take guidance from the state if there's any more that comes, and we're not moving kids from A to B to back to B to, I mean, it's just, they have to have some kind of consistency. B may not be the greatest thing, but at least it's consistent right now. But anyway, you have a motion and a second on the floor. Mr. Henderson, you're shaking your head. What's
Go ahead. I'm fine.
Okay.
Are you fine with that? Because you seconded.
Yeah.
Okay,
But the
so-
motion stand as you originally raised it,
No, they changed.
as the motion you originally made.
Grace, would you
Not-
state the motion, please?
So, yeah, and we can, if you don't, given the information, the motion is, if the board decides and let me take this off, my apologies. The motion is, if the board decides to go into Plan A, no Plan A will happen until the end of the semester.
Okay.
And that's given the current information available.
Okay, so that's a motion, and we have a second.
And I'll leave it there.
Is there any discussion?
Y'all know where I'm at on all of this.
I don't.
Well, I mean, the whole way through, we need to get the kids in the building as quickly as possible. It is what is the best for the students themselves. It also alleviates a lot of pressure on the parents. I'm very disappointed that the governor only did it K through 5. At the same time, I'm very grateful that he gave us K through 5. But I do understand that we need time for all the planning and the ordering and the decision-making to be done, and that was why I recommended at the end of the quarter. There are going to be outbreaks. It happens, but Mr. Henderson's comment about we have had a doubling in cases since the opening of school or since Labor Day is incorrect. In Wayne County, when school started on August 17th, we had 301 active cases. On Labor Day, we had 331, and right now we have 215. The numbers are coming down because people are wearing their masks and they are doing what's right. And so what this comes down to is I feel like this board needs to put the decision back in the hands of the parents. And so if we call them starting tomorrow, the next day, whatever, with the survey that says the board intends to move into Plan A beginning October 20th, you have the choice, 4 days face-to-face or virtual, then that puts it all on the parents. The parents can decide, am I willing to have my child in a non-socially distanced classroom? Am I willing to have my child in a non-socially distanced bus or not? But just do it. We worried to death over the graduation, and graduation worked. We worried to death over moving into Plan B, and Plan B is working. It's not pretty, but if our focus is the education of the children, and I look at our boards back there with what our mottos are and what our goals are, we need to move into Plan B, A, and we need to do it at the end of the first grading period.
My thing is this, Mrs. Strickland, I don't disagree with you until you get to the point that as long as the parents say that we need to move, that it's okay to move. If they can't be ready for the children to move, what is that going to cost?
I understand that.
And that's all I'm asking for is time to give the people that do the work the opportunity to get the work done so that we have a smooth transition. Now, everything wasn't as smooth and hunky-dory as we're trying to make it. But the bottom line is we went into it, it's working. Now, at the end of the grading period, they don't have enough time to get ready, which means principals won't have enough time to get ready. And there are some decisions that have to be made by teachers that may impact their decision of whether or not they're going to be working or not. And that is the only reason where I say, because we don't want to do it in the middle of a grading period. But that's why I say to the end of the semester. Because if we cannot be ready by the end of this grading period, then the next best place to make a transition is at the end of the semester.
And who knows what's going to take place.
And we don't know what the governor's going to say between now and then. So he might send everybody back, which would be the easiest transition, probably.
Mr. Henderson, you want to make a comment, sir?
Yes, and I want to speak back to what Ms. Strickland said about the comments that I made relative to the COVID cases. The comments I was speaking to as far as double the number that have been reported by Wayne County Public Schools since the beginning of the year as affecting our schools. And to me, it's very disturbing to see these particular numbers, particularly when I look at areas like Spring Creek, I look at areas like Grantham, I look at areas like the northern part of this county. Those are the areas in which we are getting the cases, but those are not the where you would think those cases would be coming from. Most of the would be coming, well, I would say with Spring Creek because of the Hispanic population, but I don't know that for certain. But let me also say this, that the Center for Disease Control says one of the things that we must do if we ever want to get this back in play is that we've got to social distance. And now for us as a board to sit up here and say that we're not gonna allow social distancing, we're going against the signs.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion and the second on the floor? All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All opposed? Did you get the numbers, Chris? 4-3.
4-3 which way?
4-3 to
In
accept
favor
the
of the
motion.
motion.
Okay.
Okay. Is any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask that at our next board meeting, which is October the 5th, if they could share with us any plans that they have been able to address relative to this after getting the comments back from the parents and staff. Another thing I would suggest that we do, and it's been suggested by several, is that this board needs to go out to the schools and see for themselves what's going on. And I think it is high time that we as a collective body go out to these schools and see for ourselves what's happening. That way we can talk then about what we're actually seeing.
So you're asking us to do a tour?
I am.
I don't think that's, that's just my opinion. I go to visit schools all the time. I have curtailed that activity since the virus has been in place because I don't want to create any more havoc on campus than they're already having to deal with, so.
I agree, and then if we start cherry picking schools, I can go in and I can tell you exactly which ones will say, give me my kids tomorrow, and which ones are gonna tell me, keep this under plan, B, C. I mean, we know where they're at, we know what they say.
Mr. Chair.
Jackson, we're going to conduct a survey, is that correct?
That's correct, but just to make one comment, if the board were to choose to collectively go out to a school, that would be a public event, and with strong schools guidance, we're trying to limit outside groups and visitors onto our campuses.
I wouldn't recommend that.
So the other thing about the survey, we don't want to survey them twice. And as I said, we have to do a survey for second semester anyway about virtual. And we can't survey until you make a decision about 5th grade because we don't know who we're asking the survey to. So you all have a little bit of time to make some decisions now that will impact the exact language that's in the survey. We can tell you specifically what we're going to need, but I'd say we'd be looking at later October before we did that survey. Because we want to ask definitively, when we come back to school after December 16th into second semester, are you coming back virtual? Are you coming back Plan A? And do you require bus transportation? But we need to know who we're asking. If it's elementary schools, if it's K to 5, we'll need a little more information, and we'll want it to be a little closer to the time period.
It would be nice to think that if, as this plays out another 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and we get into the early part of November when it's time to do the question about second semester anyway, it would be nice to think that we would have received more guidance by then about whether or not this opportunity is going to be expanded to the middle school students or to the high school students.
And because given what Dr. Harrell and Mr. Lee said about the 5th grade, we're still in an impasse with that because, it depends on numbers, which we're not going to get numbers until we do surveys. So.
And I'm just afraid if we surveyed right now, people may change their minds 6 weeks from now.
There's no reason to survey right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, so any other comments from the board?
Just a
Yes.
reaction. So, won't have any survey results for you on the 5th.
Okay.
I will share that my bias now is that we not try and serve the 5th grade that are in middle schools. But at least we have time as a leadership team to go back and see if we can pull a rabbit out of the hat somehow. But anyway.
Okay. Need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you.